farm yields 50 bushels per hectare. The skill and labor of the tenant double this product, the increase is created by the tenant. Suppose the owner, in a spirit of moderation rarely met with, does not go to the extent of absorbing this product by raising the rent, but allows the cultivator to enjoy the results of his labor. Even then justice is not satisfied. The tenant, by improving the land, has imparted a new value to the property. He, therefore, has a right to a part of the property. If the farm was originally worth 100,000 francs, and if by the labor of the tenant its value has risen to 150,000 francs, the tenant, who produced this extra value, is the legitimate proprietor of 1/3 of the farm. Mch. Kant could not have pronounced this doctrine false, for it was he who said, "Men who increase the fertility of the earth are no less useful to their fellow men, than if they should create new land." Why, then, is not this rule applicable to the man who improves the land, as well as to him who clears it? The labor of the former makes the land worth 1. That of the latter makes it worth 2, both create equal values. Why not accord to both equal property? I defy anyone to refute this argument, without again falling back on the right of first occupancy. But, it will be said, even if your wish should be granted, property would not be distributed much more evenly than now. Land does not go on increasing in value forever. After 2 or 3 seasons it attains its maximum fertility. That which is added by the agricultural art results rather from the progress of science and the diffusion of knowledge, than from the skill of the cultivator. Consequently, the addition of a few laborers to the mass of proprietors would be no argument against property. This discussion would, indeed, prove a well-nigh useless one, if our labors culminated in simply extending land privilege and industrial monopoly. In emancipating only a few hundred laborers out of the millions of proletaires. But this also is a misconception of our real thought, and does but prove the general lack of intelligence and logic. If the laborer, who adds to the value of a thing, has a right of property in it, he who maintains this value acquires the same right. For what is maintenance? It is incessant addition, continuous creation. What is it to cultivate? It is to give the soil its value every year. It is, by annually renewed creation, to prevent the diminution or destruction of the value of a piece of land. Admitting, then, that property is rational and legitimate, admitting that rent is equitable and just, I say that he who cultivates acquires property by as good a title as he who clears, or he who improves. And that every time a tenant pays his rent, he obtains a fraction of property in the land entrusted to his care, the denominator of which is equal to the proportion of rent paid. Unless you admit this, you fall into absolutism and tyranny. You recognize class privileges. You sanction slavery. Whoever labors becomes a proprietor. This is an inevitable deduction from the acknowledged principles of political economy and jurisprudence. And when I say proprietor, I do not mean simply as do our hypocritical economists proprietor of his allowance, his salary, his wages. I mean proprietor of the value which he creates, and by which the master alone profits. As all this relates to the theory of wages and of the distribution of products, and as this matter never has been even partially cleared up, I ask permission to insist on it. This discussion will not be useless to the work in hand. Many persons talk of admitting working people to a share in the products and profits. But in their minds this participation is pure benevolence. They have never shown, perhaps never suspected, that it was a natural, necessary right, inherent in labor, and inseparable from the function of producer, even in the lowest forms of his work. This is my proposition: the laborer retains, even after he has received his wages, a natural right of property in the thing which he has produced. I again quote Mch. Quant, some laborers are employed in draining marshes, in cutting down trees and brushwood, in a word, in cleaning up the soil. They increase the value, they make the amount of property larger. They are paid for the value which they add in the form of food and daily wages. It then becomes the property of the capitalist. The price is not sufficient, the labor of the workers has created a value. Now this value is their property. But they have neither sold nor exchanged it. And you, capitalist, you have not earned it. That you should have a partial right to the whole, in return for the materials that you have furnished and the provisions that you have supplied, is perfectly just. You contributed to the production, you ought to share in the enjoyment. But your right does not annihilate that of the laborers, who, in spite of you, have been your colleagues in the work of production. Why do you talk of wages? The money with which you pay the wages of the laborers remunerates them for only a few years of the perpetual possession which they have abandoned to you. Wages is the cost of the daily maintenance and refreshment of the laborer. You are wrong in calling it the price of a sale. The working man has sold nothing. He knows neither his right, nor the extent of the concession which he has made to you, nor the meaning of the contract which you pretend to have made with him. On his side, utter ignorance. On yours, error and surprise, not to say deceit and fraud. Let us make this clearer by another and more striking example. No one is ignorant of the difficulties that are met with in the conversion of untilled land into arable and productive land. These difficulties are so great, that usually an isolated man would perish before he could put the soil in a condition to yield him even the most meager living. To that end are needed the united and combined efforts of society, and all the resources of industry. Mch. Kant quotes on the subject numerous and well-authenticated facts, little thinking that he is amassing testimony against his own system. Let us suppose that a colony of 20 or 30 families establishes itself in a wild district, covered with underbrush and forests, and from which, by agreement, the natives consent to withdraw. Each one of these families possesses a moderate but sufficient amount of capital, of such a nature as a colonist would be apt to choose, animals, seeds, tools, and a little money and food. The land having been divided, each one settles himself as comfortably as possible, and begins to clear away the portion allotted to him. But after a few weeks of fatigue, such as they never before have known, of inconceivable suffering, of ruinous and almost useless labor, our colonists begin to complain of their trade. Their condition seems hard to them. They curse their sad existence. Suddenly, one of the shrewdest among them kills a pig, cures a part of the meat, and, resolved to sacrifice the rest of his provisions, goes to find his companions in misery. Friends, he begins in a very benevolent tone, how much trouble it costs you to do a little work and live uncomfortably. A fortnight of labor has reduced you to your last extremity. Let us make an arrangement by which you shall all profit. I offer you provisions and wine, you shall get so much every day. We will work together, and, zounds! My friends, we will be happy and contented. Would it be possible for empty stomachs to resist such an invitation? The hungriest of them follow the treacherous tempter. They go to work. The charm of society, emulation, joy, and mutual assistance double their strength. The work can be seen to advance. Singing and laughing, they subdue nature. In a short time, the soil is thoroughly changed. The mellowed earth waits only for the seed. That done, the proprietor pays his laborers, who, on going away, return him their thanks, and grieve that the happy days which they have spent with him are over. Others follow this